Orion and the Dark has released. It's the new DreamWorks movie. Were you aware of this was a thing? Because this is not quite the usual DreamWorks movie, as it didn't even release in cinemas at all. It is a straight-to-streaming movie that went right to Netflix, of all things. Apparently DreamWorks are working quite hard at the minute, since they've also just dropped a sequel to Megamind. Kinda. Have you seen it? But while I've already got gripes about Megamind because I was already making a video on the Megamind TV series for them to just drop a trailer in the middle of production for, today is all about Orion and the Dark, and it's a film I've been waiting for a while. I noticed when the trailer dropped, I don't know how well widespread that news really was, but now it's finally here. And actually, I had a little bit more anticipation going in the days leading up to it, as I saw a preemptive review that gave it quite some glowing praise. Even going so far as to compare it to the likes of Sony's Mitchell's vs. Machines and Pixar's Inside Out. That's some pretty high praise, you know. I've seen a lot of just animation schlop, and I do think there is some sort of formula to a movie that elevates to the whole nother realm, you know? Inside Out grazes through to that territory, and Mitchell's vs. Machines definitely does. That is a movie that is quintessentially special. And so, Orion and the Dark is out, and I'm here to tell you whether it really is that special something that's going to be the underrated movie of the year, or so it could well become. And let me tell you, it is certainly something. In case you're completely unaware, we'll slowly go through the elements of the plot, but the main basic core idea is you have this guy, this little kid called Orion, who has a fear of practically everything, be it murder clowns, 5G cancer, mosquitoes, skyscrapers, bees and dogs and oceans, locker rooms, a bully, clogging the toilet, saying a long answer to a question wrong, haircuts, you name it, he is the quintessential fearful kid. And he's about to go on a tumultuous adventure through the night as he is confronted by the Dark, the living embodiment of his biggest fear of all, darkness. Well, he'll go on to meet the other night entities of the night and see the beauty of darkness. And while that last sentence does kind of sound like a cult leading into some form of Satanism in a child's movie, it's very much not. But you can start to see some points aligning for where this film is going, what it's trying to achieve, and actually where it gets some kind of classic Pixar influences. The idea of making a movie about a child's fear, especially of something standard like The Dark, is very in line with what early Pixar movies had the objective of doing. Monsters Inc. was based out of the fear of monsters living in your cupboard or under your bed. Toy Story was the element of kids' imaginations bringing life into their toys. I guess Cars, maybe, was the imagination of kids driving little toy cars back and forth, imagining what their lives were like. That logic kind of falls flat pretty quickly. But the groundwork of making a child's movie based around a basic child relatable thing is very, very good. And this isn't actually fully an original movie based just off of that. It is based off of a book. We talked about it when we covered the original trailer of Orion and the Dark, but it's actually a well-regarded children's book first, though this movie has done all sorts of extrapolations. The other night entities weren't in the books. It was just the darkness saying, "How dare you dislike me? I'm beautiful. I'm a queen, I slay." So let's get into how the plot actually rolls itself out, as we then start to pinpoint all of its references, its inspirations, and where it made some choices along the way. For a very start, the DreamWorks logo has this nice, almost light mode, I guess, paperwork aesthetic, fitting to Orion having a fear of the dark, and it does lead into where, straight away, I guess we'll get right onto it, where people made a connection to Mitchell's vs. Machines, because it does do that beautifully artsy thing that I always praise of incorporating 2D and 3D. Orion has a sketchbook. There it is. They're animated. Sometimes they come to life. They jump off of the page. They exist in a world where it makes sense to be a little bit artsy, a little bit nicer, a little bit more creatively on point. Except barely. The footage you're seeing behind you is practically just shuffled shots from the movies, trying to avoid spoilers until we get to them. And you can see with your own eyes, they don't actually use these 2D elements a lot. Mitchell's vs. Machines was clogged absolutely full of it, because the main character in that movie was practically continuing to tell the story and journaling as they went. Orion has a sketchbook at the start, and then it starts getting shredded up in a black hole void sequence. Don't worry about the logic of what's going on here yet, we'll get there later. Yes, you can compare it to Mitchell's vs. Machines. Clearly there are animation inspirations there, But this isn't Mitchell's vs. Machines, it's just a light nod, dipping their toes into the water of this direction, but not really doing it much, if at all, or even well. So already, this glowing review that I heard from The Empire, praising it as the next somewhat Mitchell's vs. Machines, seems a little overrated. But at the very least, it's nice that it exists, even in a small degree. I did say I always praise 3D and 2D incorporated together. Apparently this is the first time I'm not so much. Anyway, Orion has a pretty classic day at school. There's a girl that he's scared of talking to. There's a bully that scares him a lot. He's scared about what he's gonna say in class. And he's scared about an upcoming planetarium trip because of all the possible things that could go wrong socially. Or physically, like a traffic accident on the bus. Or planets crushing people, like chandeliers. You know, it's a pretty standard beat. I'm not particularly impressed by this character. It's interesting what their perspective on the world is, but they don't seem to stand out as interesting in any other regard. The jokes or dialogue that they have are okay. There's a part where he says to a teacher, "My parents don't believe in space." It's a whole thing, but like, that's not really the most creative dialogue line to explain that. It's a whole thing is like almost a cliche line of its own at this point. And similarly, the voice performance of Orion, I don't usually actually mention voice actors' performances in these movies, but in this movie, it's notable because Orion, for a start, doesn't sound like a child, but that's kind of the trend anyway. The little boy in Mitchell's vs. Machines certainly didn't sound like a child either. But this child is also defined by how much they are constantly screaming, because they are constantly in a state of fight or flight, anxious against all of the fears that they have at every single moment. And the screams just don't sell it. We haven't even gotten to the proper part where he is screaming, but to be honest, even the little yeah-has that he does is basically his screaming. We'll get there properly when we get to some proper screaming. Anyway, he fears other things that are completely irrational, like the fact that his parents may move away while he's at school, leaving him abandoned. There's got to be some sort of psychological reasoning to that. Why does he have abandonment issues? Like, what do these parents do? Regardless, they seem supportive on screen, so that's something. And they try to rattle into him the message of the movie: don't let fear get in the way of living your life. Feel the fear and do it anyway. The movie then goes on to go even further into its slightly more mature topic of talking about the fear of death, with Orion reading a book about existential nihilism and trying to imagine literally nothing after you die. Which, yeah, pretty intensive, but it's just that. An intensive minute before we come to the real main part. The title card comes up, and then the dark appears. In the middle of the night, there he is. It's the trailer clips that you've seen, if you're aware of the trailer. And this guy is even more of a voice delivery asterisk to me. It's at this point you hear Orion, for a start, doing his proper screaming. He falls off of the bed, and it doesn't really sound anywhere close to genuine. But the dark here as well is played by Paul Walter Hauser, doing an impression of Seth Rogen, essentially. And the Seth Rogen voice, I don't really think works for this kind of character. It's kind of like hearing the original Shrek voice actor, Chris McFarlane, voice Shrek. Yeah, it sounds like a version of the character, but it doesn't sound like the Mike Myers classic. This sounds like the kind of role, and I can't unhear it now that I saw somewhere else on the internet this was mentioned, this sounds like the role that would be more fitting to a Robin Williams-esque genie. This big, fantastical monster that has all these dreams and aspirations, but also emotions and perspectives, and it's just played middling, with a voice that's like, good, it's a protagonist voice, I guess, but it doesn't hit any deep beats. It doesn't have high highs or low lows. It's a mediocre middle ground, which is kind of what this whole movie starts to sound like. There are then little jibs and jabs for the audience in the crowd. There's an incredibly brief projector introduction to the concept of dark, voiced by Werner Herzog. And then they ran with that for the marketing for like the whole bloody time it's existed. It was a 5-second gag. It was a one line. Come on, guys. This is getting disingenuous at this point. You're DreamWorks. Do you really have to do this? And then there's like other things, like they call out the Sundance Festival and call it a boys club because they didn't like the Darks film. you know, it's whatever. But of course, in other places, there's some nice stints of direction. A lot of reviews I've been reading about this movie focus so much more on the writer who adapted this screenplay, and that's understandable. That's kind of what I really aim for more. But on the directing side, there's occasionally some nice elements, like there's a shadow silhouetting 2D animation predicting how the night will go. I always love when DreamWorks leans a little into the shadow territory, you know? Give it a little bit of a nudge. Hey, that's a nice idea right there. You should expand that a little bit more, DreamWorks. But then once that's all done, the Dark decides that he's gonna show Orion the beauty of the night, rather than being terrified all the time, bothered by him constantly screaming at the Dark for being his biggest fear. So off they go out of the rooftop. And then they do something choicey. This is like practically a spoiler, all right? We are 15 minutes in, and they do a massive pull under the rug thing. They jump cut to Orion 20 years later. Suddenly, he's a father talking to his daughter, telling the story. Oh my god, how to ruin the storytelling momentum you've just built. Kind of? I don't know. In doing that, obviously, you know, Orion's not going to die. There are now no kind of stakes because you know he exists in the future. At the same time, does that really have an impact in a child's movie? You probably know he's not going to die. It seems completely out of left field, and it absolutely is. But then the more you think about it, the more you can see why they did it. The daughter now is a character contributing to the plot, saying that they don't believe that he's actually going to be solved of his darkness fear, because of course fear of the dark is an evolutionary advantage to our caveman brains. They start breaking down the very formula in a meta way to where the film's story is about to go. We learn that the daughter is a bit of a poet, and that's their passion as opposed to space from Orion. And then as soon as she says, yeah, it's not going to end your classic way because that would be too cliched and doesn't make sense in the real world, we're right back into the story. That scene kind of ruins the moment for me at first, but they keep coming back to it in a way that tries to justify it. And the real question is, does it work? I don't know, to be honest. It's daring, okay, to change your storytelling formula and just full-on dive out like that. And they make some interesting choices with it. I don't know if I like it. At the same time, if we didn't have it, it would just be a cliche-fest story of him getting cured of the dark by the end of the night. Hee-hey-ha, move on, call it a day. Is that necessarily bad? I don't know. We're going to keep going through the plot as details emerge and we start to see more of the justification. But it does make me feel very conflicted, and I was very confused the first time I watched it. So anyway, as Orion and the Dark are flying through the night, we have certain points that the Dark wants to present about how darkness is beautiful. You see the cities splattering into light as they reach into the night, kind of like that Pixar short of day versus night. You could definitely see more elements of that coming by. Also, by the way, the reality of this world gets more confusing the more you think about it. There is no sun and moon, I guess, in this world. It's just the entity of darkness circling around the Earth, but also sometimes taking breaks and sure, whatever. And then also the entity of light working as the sun, I guess, splitting the sky and turning it into light. Sure, whatever. Kind of like the Pixar short. We won't think about it too hard. There's other elements of beauty that the darkness brings, like seeing wrinkles on an actor on a projector screen. It is clearer in the night. Fireflies come out at night, as much as Orion says he's allergic to fireflies. And you see all sorts of other elements. Just light breeding from the darkness in a beautiful way. And then the Dark dives Orion into the middle of the fireworks, even though they're clearly explosives. And, you know, maybe I'm a little bit of an Orion, but come on, man. Definitely a fire and safety hazard. Anyway, the next story beat comes in because, you know, we gotta read those story beats, where Orion is upset with the Dark because he dropped him. And so they confront each other in the darkness of the forest down below, where we then learn that Orion is to stay with the Dark for 24 hours. That's how a day-night cycle works, after all. And the Dark can't go backwards. All the while, there are some nice other details, like how the Dark turns his spine into a staircase for Orion to get back on his back. Anyway, it's here we then learn the first murmurings about how there is light spreading across the Earth, which makes you consider how quick is a bloody night. Like, that was instantaneous that we've suddenly got sunlight coming back up to us, but sure. And then, as the Dark says there are no other night entities, he then goes on to show off the other night entities. I don't know what that earlier thing was about, but okay, whatever. Where we finally get an explanation of all of these characters. I tried to pass them when I saw the trailer. Apparently I'm not very good at it. This is where the Inside Out references come in. And when people say, oh, it's like Inside Out, I maybe naively thought, oh, so it must be as good as Inside Out. I wouldn't quite say that so much now. This is clearly trying to present some concepts to kids in an interesting way to help, articulate it. But the way they've done it is just to mimic the Pixar formula. It's just, hey, now there are 5 new characters. They're all color-coded, they all visually match some sort of concept. They kind of work together, but it also sounds like you just pulled them out of your ass. It's like copying homework, but trying not to make it look the same. First things first, you've got Insomnia, a little green gremlin thing that's always thinking about maths apparently around him. He's the guy that whispers into your ears your deepest, darkest thoughts that keep you awake at night. An unlikable trait that doesn't really have a good side to it. Are they going to explore that? Absolutely not! It's just how the world works, apparently. You've got Quiet, the tiny, tiny mouse. I feel like an idiot for not working that out at the time. At nighttime, everything is really quiet, and that's because they inhale sounds. You've then also got Sloth, I think, or is it Sleep? I couldn't actually tell if they were just pronouncing it strangely or which is which, but that's the one that actually puts them to sleep. Unexplained Noises is another one. Again, not really a person you would want to have around, but they are just around. Their character design is nice, at least. And then finally, you have Sweet Dreams. I probably don't need to go too far into that one, although if I was to, I would go into the fact that Sweet Dreams has way more power than all the other ones, going into their heads and doing all sorts of buffoonery. It's an interesting collection of cast. It's not the Inside Out feelings, It's like clearly a hodgepodge trying to cram stuff together. They don't really seem to have much of a team dynamic. They're just together, and there's not really much of a consistency between them all. They don't really have a reason to exist, and there isn't even any others. I thought maybe there'd be a whole set of daytime entities that we'd learn about later, but no. And then you got other questions like, okay, if they only operate at night just because they happen to be doing that, are there not humans that are asleep in the daytime? Is that not possible in this world? They mention that daydreaming is a thing, so how did that exist before if they're gonna do it later in the plot? Spoilers, they go to daytime. I don't know. Anyway, they're all upset because Orion has been brought along the way, saying, do you have any idea how many things could go wrong? They're gonna break the perfect natural balance of order. Dark should have never brought you here, yada yada. Also, they take a break and pause at every time zone, apparently. Although time zones as well are a whole messy line, so how does that work? What do they do over the 24-hour square gap that exists on Earth? I think about movies too hard, man. Anyway, what follows now is then more night entity stuff. And I don't think this is good storytelling at this point. I enjoyed the moment, sure. And movies, I guess, are meant to be entertaining, but for the next, what feels like 15 minutes, it's probably just 7, but it felt long. We then go for a long and arduous sequence of seeing all 5 other entities doing their jobs in the night. After specifically saying, hey, we don't want the kid around us, the Dark just takes Orion to each of the entities to witness them. And at every single opportunity, Orion is getting in the way, objecting to everything that happens in front of them. To be fair, some of this is funny. I love that Sleep takes people out in violent ways. Great classic child joke. She gets out a hammer to whack a baby to sleep later on. It's brilliant. There is, of course, some inconsistency. Some people come with props. Some people just have the magic ability to know a human's thoughts when they're nearby, and some of them could go inside their heads and incorporate. It's slapped together. They also keep up that cliche thing of the character that puts people to sleep randomly kissing even strangers, and I feel like that's a joke that's gonna date, especially kissing the kid unwelcomed. Anyway, each entity then one by one starts to dislike Orion for being too judgy, too invasive, or just getting in the way of their job entirely. Yeah, just breaking the entire balance of order, because the world would not be the same without random, accidental, unknown noises in the background. But of course, the worst case scenario is when Orion interrupts some sweet dreams. By being inside of the dreamscape and just thinking their thoughts, the whole thing turns into a nightmare. Suddenly now there's an evil cucumber, they're in a dentist office, there's a giant version of his bully incorporated into this dream, all sorts of stuff happening. Oh, also, if you die in the dream, you die in real life is a rule. I don't know if that is just there for a crummy sense of urgency in an action plot, even though you've also already established they live in 20 years' time, or if it's just meant to be an Inception reference. I don't know. But then you do start to see some recurring elements coming together, which is interesting. Orion gets out of that jiffy by clogging the toilet, as was one of their fears, and that dark cupboard of existential dread also appears to save the day, to a degree. And so everyone's upset with Orion, and even Orion's upset with themselves. Despite saving themselves, they felt terrified the entire time. Until he turns around and becomes happy again because he realizes he's not afraid of the dark. The character. Does that absolve his entire fear of darkness plotline? Is that what that was meant to be? He was suddenly so joyful about it. I don't think that was enough of a build-up to say, hey, I feel great again. And then going even further, Orion then goes to call out the fact that he's gonna have a future daughter. Because then the plot goes right back to this meta story where we've jumped ahead 20 years. Where we basically come to learn that the dad is improving this whole story as he goes along now, I think. It's not a real story. He didn't actually meet the Dark 20 years ago. He's just telling us tale to his daughter. He just came up with that light character, and the daughter's questioning whether it's a guest appearance or a proper plot point later. And they even ask why he's talking about the future, because he's breaking his own storytelling rules. It's all fake, right? You just kind of got to go with it, I guess. And then after establishing that confusing meta point for a moment again, they then say, oh no, okay, off you go again, forget the future plotline, you were flying through the night again, but different. You have now made it to the halfway mark of this video. Thank you very much for getting this far. If you're enjoying this review, do give us a subscribe a little early on. We're going to be doing reviews out of every 2024 animated movie, and maybe series as well, that I can cover. And this is just a cheeky ping at the halfway mark to bring you out of it for a little meta storytelling. How thematic, eh? And now, after everyone specifically just hated Orion, now that he's in a good mood, we get a montage of it going well, with Orion coming in and helping, randomly knowing another language in order to whisper some sweet horrors into some poor middle-aged man's ears. Everything all goes great. If you think about it too hard, it gets confusing. How does Quiet have the ability to inhale sounds from inside a house and the humans don't question it? They're just relieved that symbols suddenly stopped working or something. Whatever. At least the speaking another language thing is a nice, simple gag. I kind of do enjoy it as much as I don't understand the logic. You're not supposed to, you know? Let loose. But then, of course, after we've had our high, we've got to arbitrarily reach our low again, as the Dark hears of another kid that's crying about how they hate the Dark so much. But again, this child can't really act crying very well, but sure. And Dark has a bit of a moping section where he says that he's sad, that maybe he's not a good guy, and maybe he is as scary as everyone says. You know, identity crisis. And so then this movie then goes on another tangent of storytelling that I don't really know exactly what they're doing. I think it is just they're slapping pieces together and they don't stitch together right. Orion's just witnessed that the Dark is feeling down because he heard someone talking about him negatively, right? Maybe he can reflect on that, on the fact that he had all those thoughts before. The fact that Dark's even here in the first place is to finally confront him because he was by far the worst, always crying and screaming about him being such a bad, horrible thing that he doesn't want to interact with. Instead, what Orion does is Orion parts with the Dark naturally as he goes off to mope, and goes on to sing the praises of light to everybody else instead, doubling down on the idea that maybe Dark isn't such a great thing because light is so much better. After they've already established that the Dark has a bit of a tumultuous relationship with the light and it's kind of a sensitive topic, Orion's just here twisting the knife for no goddamn reason. And then we cut again to the dad and the daughter, and now we start getting to maybe a little bit more of the point, I guess, of this story to a certain extent. Because you see, the original point of this movie seemed to be about teaching Orion to overcome his fears. That's not where the messaging goes by the end of the film, though. I guess him saying, "I'm not scared of you," was him getting over the fears then. But then we have this scene. It's adult Orion being with his daughter, going out for a walk in the night. The night is surprisingly bustling with a crowd, considering she was going to bed. What, did she try to put her to bed at 7 or something? Regardless, they then come to a park pathway with a flickering light and decide not to go that way, where we learn that adult Orion is also still somewhat scared of the dark, to a more natural degree, sure. But that means that this story that he's telling of overcoming these fears is becoming a little bit more complicated because the relationship with humans and fear is a little bit more muddled. It's a lot more nuanced in that regard. In a normal story, it should all get fully fixed, where Orion's not afraid of anything anymore, you know? They even make a joke about how there should be a dance party at the end, like every other DreamWorks movie, and then there isn't one in this one, so they kind of broke that trope. Great, I'm relieved. Instead, the plot starts to become about the bond between a father and their child telling a story together. And I can't tell if I dislike it or not. The movie gets distracted on its main plot to tell a different one that it slid under the surface, and it does so by cramming in these occasional meta scenes that kinda don't work in the moment and only really come together in hindsight. It's an interesting one to say the least, but there's all the more to come. So anyway, young Orion is doubling down around a campfire, telling all the other night entities about all the vibrant colors that exist in the daytime and how great the daytime is. Oh, I'm so sad the Dark's moping in the corner. Screw him. And of course, the Dark immediately notices. And so off they go on an awkward journey. The Dark, deeply emotionally hurt by the things that Orion's been doing, and it makes sense. What a dick! So then the Dark forces Orion to give an apology video to the rest of the night entities, to which the entities completely reject it, and they all individually quit on the spot, saying they want to go to the daytime instead. Only the Dark can't go into the daytime because he literally is eviscerated away, and so that's the final plot point. The destroying of nature in this balancing world that really doesn't make sense the more you think about it. Sure, whatever. Sweet Dream says that she knows daydreams exist, so she can perfectly adapt over there, but then there is no daydreaming entity in the day, so like, what am I supposed to take from this? And so the Dark, in his mopey state, considers staying back to be eviscerated by the light. And then he doesn't. He flies away, and then stops again at another rock, and then decides to fade away. Why didn't you do it in front of the building, buddy? Like, your mood didn't change. Sure, okay, whatever. I guess it's to get this next point out, which I really enjoyed. But again, it's like the messaging of this story is muddled with it. The Dark goes on to say that there's only dark now in the night. There is no sleep, there is no quiet, it sounds like nothing, and it looks like nothing. This is a cool beat, a cool point to say, hey, that unimaginable concept of nothingness, the existential dread that Orion had when thinking about what is life after death thing, is here. It is darkness without all the other entities. However, they do not expand there. They mention it as a side piece little bit, but they don't expand anymore. Orion has nothing to say. The Dark says nothing more. He then sits down on a rock and waits for daylight. I think that's a really cool theme, and they just kind of left it be. They didn't really address anything. The fear of the darkness is long gone. That's never going to be mentioned again, practically. The fear of this nothingness never gets mentioned again. It then just becomes a moping sesh. The Dark says, if anyone really cares about me, where did they all go? And then he commits suicide. But he's only a concept anyway, so it's not too bad. It's totally like Bing Bong, right? Except without really any of the emotion, a little bit more guilt-tripping if anything, and then off he goes. Now the daylight is here, he feels bad, he's not actually a bad, villainous person, but as he says, the day waits for no one. And so the Dark disappears, and also now they're on a floating turtle. It wasn't a rock in the end. Alright. This also doesn't really become much of a thing. They don't mention what's symbolically important about a floating turtle. Is this Terry Pratchett world? Am I playing Super Smash Bros. Melee? What's going on? And then the story goes one step further with their meta story, just outright admitting that they've practically written themselves into a corner. And they're specifically planning out how to Deus Ex Machina themselves into more plotline. I think it's very interesting that they did actually eviscerate the concept of darkness. It gets a little confusing, I'm a little unsure exactly what that means, but yeah, alright, sure, whatever. But then his daughter goes on to say, that's not a good ending, you can't leave it there. Even if you've ran out of ideas, it happened to you, you can't say this is how it ends, yada yada yada. To which the dad then takes his daughter to the real-life planetarium, looping us back to that original plot point that's long been left in the dark for a while. Excuse the pun, that was legitimately not my intention. Even though she ironically says that they should really be looking up at the real stars at night, but you can't in the city because of light pollution. Anyway, at the planetarium, we learn that Orion took a job at this planetarium, and the daughter comes up with an idea for the story. The idea for this story is for her to make an appearance in the story. It's literally a self-insert fan fiction story at this point. Breaking down the idea that Orion ever actually met the Dark, it's just a story after all. The daughter just is there, coming to bring in her great wisdom and wondering if she could be friends with Orion of the same age. Her name is Hypatia, named after the ancient Greek astronomer, and Orion, of course, is the constellation. And the solution for this Deus Ex Machina, other than time-traveling children appearing into this story that's just fake so you can do what you want at this point, is to say a poem. Basically saying, I miss the night, and wrapping up how the rest of the world is doing. Saying that the world has become too bright and too loud, too selfish and ready to fight. I don't know about you, I thought crime went up when it was dark, but apparently crime goes up when it's bright. Everyone's in the road for some reason. It's just pseudo-apocalypse going on right now. And to be fair, that makes sense. They don't really linger on it much. I don't understand the proper logic, but yeah, it's only daytime now, so of course, nobody could sleep. Although, I guess sleep is out there in the day, so you can. Is it that hard? Can we not understand? How brain dead are car drivers? They seem so confused immediately. Anyway, the permanent light of daytime isn't as good as everyone thought, it turns out. The one who is quiet is never heard. Awkwardly dismissed as mere nerds, according to the poem. Yeah, alright, sure. And the final note of the poem being, dreams made me feel safe in a world that erased me, which is kind of heavy. I don't see where or what erased you at any point, other than the tiny mouse, or literally dark, but yeah, okay. And so, to actually solve the plot, they need to bring the Dark back, and they do it by combining all of the entity's powers into Orion. Kind of a classic ending when you think about it, makes a lot of sense. The Dark is alive in Orion's memories, so he just has to dream it to be true, and then also apparently Sweet Dream can make that a reality. That's kind of a gap in the magic power system we have going on, but yeah, sure. Bringing back that whole element of Inception, if you die in the dream, you die in real life, but now everyone can come together. Sleep can put him to sleep, this time with a sheep and not with chloroform this time. And Sweet Dreams can dive in to get out the Dark. It's then your big action sequence of confronting all your fears at once. At least that lines up very nicely for what you want to do. The Dark makes its appearance. Orion is immediately not scared of it, and I guess has the consciousness to realize they're in a dream. Don't worry about it. And then that cupboard appears again. The big bad black hole void that sucks in everything. It's at this point you then see the sketchbook getting ripped out, showing all these animated fears again, all being sucked in. Thematically, that means nothing, but yeah, sure, hold on, whatever. And Orion has to confront the biggest, baddest dream by jumping into the void to pull Orion out of this black hole-like thing. Oh, but hold on a minute, we haven't used the other night entities, you know, the whole idea of insomnia and strange noises, so now we need to wake him up. Sweet Dreams dives out in the whole moment, gets everyone to wake him up. Honestly, it sounds like some terrible edited meme, because uncontrollable weird noises in the background is just playing a horn constantly, and then the other dislikable character is just shouting at him the whole time, unable to get him out of the deep dream that he's in. These two dislikable traits don't manage to wake him up. They don't contribute anything nice to society, they don't seem like very likable characters, and they don't really contribute to the final plot either. Great. It's only Quiet that then jumps in, ironically taking out all sound so that only she can talk, and then she does Insomnia's role of you're gonna miss your field trip. Thematically, I like the idea that she blocks out the obvious answer, but the fact that she just whispers like Insomnia, I don't know if it fully works. But hey, I'm glad she got her moment. I'm glad she turned off the bloody siren head over there. The Dark then explodes out of his head, creates night, is not eviscerated by the light this time. We get to witness the stars and crabs, and humans immediately stop fighting. Alright. There's other beautiful things like Aurora Borealis. And Dark now is not upset with himself because of how you see yourself is through the eyes of others, you know? And he feels loved. Now, even though that kid's still from before, you know, hurt him, does he need to go and plague that child for 24 hours? I assume that's the sequel. Orion then says he's terrified to go to this planetarium field trip, but he's going anyway. He doesn't question that Hypatia's going to the exact same house as him, but, you know, sure. He hugs Dark, and then off they go. The Dark also says, you've got a good father there, and that doesn't really get addressed anymore. It's a cheeky tongue-in-cheek thing. We never see Dark again. That's that done. Legitimately, there's no he's gonna return. It's not even a real story. Like, it's literally just a tale. It doesn't have any further from there. But the movie doesn't finish. I'm not done yet, believe it or not, because then the plot continues going. Because Hypatia is here. At any point, you could just say, hey, it's over. Cut to the adult saying, there we go, we finished the story. Isn't that great? Oh, good, go to bed. Wow, whack him with some, a baby hammer. But no, instead, they then have the plot of Orion trying to work out how to get rid of Hypatia because now she's stuck in the past and doesn't even know how she got here. What? So Orion wakes up the parents. They don't recognize her. They slept through the entire day, by the way. It's been 24 hours, so they've been permanently in the night, even though they destroyed the night. I guess they slept through the day as well. Why did they not wake up? What's wrong with their sleep schedule? Is 8 or even 9 hours not enough for them? What's wrong with them? They make a joke about how Hypatia is Orion's childhood friend, and then she can't leave. Orion finally comes to the conclusion that he must have a wife in order to have a child. And then, we're not even done, Tico appears. Tico is a time-traveling elf of some sort who's come to help with his own time machine. Oh my god, what is this plotline doing? He then says we have to stop international time monsters. And so in the garden, there they are, interdimensional time monsters. Hypatia gets a gun, she starts shooting them, they dive into a capsule time travel device that puts them 20 years in the future. Whoa, my god, what is happening? We then come to adult Orion, who then sees Hypatia has come back, so they weren't outside at the planetarium anymore, he's just teleported, I get, or whatever. Tico's there. They say long time no see, although I'm surprised Orion remembers anything, to be honest. A monster appears in the bedroom, they get shot, and Tico disappears, because he's actually got the time travel machine to make things make sense. You would think that's a terrible plotline, and it is. It's confusing. I thought we were going for like another 20 minutes of what is going on at this point. You've really crumpled the plotline in on of itself. But no, it actually turns out that that later part, that confusing ending, was made up last minute, on the spot, by Hypatia, who is now an adult herself. We've jumped forwards another 20 years, who is now talking to her son, Tico, about confronting the fear of the dark, or time-traveling monsters. With him coming up with this ending of time travel to fix that Deus Ex Machina of what's going on now. Orion now is an old man, pseudo looking like Steven Spielberg, I guess, saying the time machine was a good idea to wrap up all the notes, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because it's not even about overcoming the fears as a child, it's about bonding with said child, telling this story to make them feel better, I think. Orion doesn't learn not to fear the dark, because he does as an adult, but they all learn to bond with each other, improving with their poetry and their astronomy knowledge, and what have yous, with it ending with Orion looking up to the real stars in his late age, as we cut back to the past, 40 years back, alongside his old wife Sally, as we then transition back to that planetarium trip, with young Sally right by him, looking at those fake ones. Surprisingly, they managed to wrap it all together, because he did, in fact, go. What a weird movie. I was excited about this movie because it's a DreamWorks production. It's always good to keep on top of an actual giant studio, even if it is a streaming Netflix movie. I was even more excited when I heard reviews making comparisons to Inside Out and Mitchell's vs. Machines. But to be honest, it's not as good as Mitchell's vs. Machines or Inside Out. It's kind of inspired, but it's also kind of just a sloppy rendition of the same core ideas. Charlie Kaufman is a clear veteran of the industry that does know what they're doing, but I would regard this movie as an 8 out of 10, not a 10 out of 10, you know? Mitchell's vs. Machines and the like are on a whole nother level of perfect storytelling, where every beat comes together brilliantly. This has some nice threading ideas, but it doesn't quite stitch them together perfectly, and a lot of the things they say get mentioned and lost. They don't expand on the nothingness. They don't even really address the first idea of overcoming fears. There are tiny callbacks, but not in a way that makes the whole thing recontextualized and interestingly rewatchable. But hey, we don't get a dance party at the end. We don't even get a post-credit scene either. It's just kind of one and done, hug the dark, he never comes back, because he never really was real in the first place. There are some great hand-drawn animations scattered throughout the movie, not enough to give it the pedestal of Mitchell's vs. Machines on that regard, but they have some in the credits. It's nice, it's all crayon style, I like it. There's nothing more on the bully, he just was a big dream villain at the 2/3 mark, which is kind of a classic anyway, it's kind of tropey in that regard. And it's an interesting switch up with the whole kids element, but it also just gets really convoluted as a Deus Ex Machina that I think doesn't not work, but it doesn't work perfectly either. It's just messy. And the more I think about this movie, the more the logic of the world is just hard to swallow. How can they have a whole element about planets and planetariums if the sun doesn't even work like the sun in this universe? The main two voice acting performances I'm not entirely on board with. I think they could have been far more interesting in direction and quality. And then there are those long sequences of just seeing the entities doing their thing, they get grumpy, and then seeing the entities do their thing all over again, but now it's the good ending. It's like they didn't lean on anything, and they just kept taking detours. I can see the Inside Out comparisons, but it is nowhere near as thought out and put together as Inside Out. Maybe Inside Out 2 will show us how it's done, but even then I'm not entirely convinced. At the end of the day, it's a decent movie, but it loses out on the message by the end to detour on whatever is going on with the kids and the storytelling Deus Ex Machina to somewhat wrap it all up, and in a way it kinda does, but that core message of fears is long lost. I think it should have had some final element of that. Bring us all back to Orion's original fears to have this nuanced perspective by the end of the movie, but it gets dropped like halfway in and never addressed again. On the bright side, it's certainly a good time to be a DreamWorks fan. You got the Megamind trailer that's just dropped, so there's a whole nother thing going on. And that looks way worse than this damn project. At the same time as well, everything else is releasing. It's kind of a mini golden age for 2024. In the UK, Migration only just released in cinemas the same day. You've also got The Jungle Bunch, which is a rabbit hole of its own. On the gaming front, you have the Persona 3 remake to enjoy, and also Tiger's Apprentice released somewhere. I need to dig into this. I've got a lot of news and things to cover, but this was the big one I was waiting for. I'm a little disappointed, I'm not gonna lie, but I don't hate this movie. I don't know when I'll ever find time to rewatch it if I care that deeply. Maybe I'm deeply in the wrong. It's interesting. It takes some crazy artsy choices, but I don't think it entirely works. But at the very least, it is incredibly original, even if based on a book. That's fine by me. If we didn't base things on books, we wouldn't have movies like Nimona, you know, one of the most creative projects of the last year. But it's certainly a stepping stone into some more experimental content from DreamWorks, and I will absolutely support it in that regard. For now though, I think I'm gonna end it off there. My name's been Daz. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. Let me know your thoughts of Orion and the Dark. How did you feel about that meta twist storyline ending element? Like, I think it wrapped up okay for that little detour in its own little knot, but it was a shocker, and you know, you've heard my thoughts. I've just been rambling on it for about an hour now, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the YouTube comments down below or over on our Discord, and I will see you in a little bit.